Hello and welcome to another edition of the Don't Panic Project. We provide conversations to help empower, inspire, and educate people suffering from stress and anxiety and depression. Today's guest is Jed Applerouth from the Applerouth Company. Jed Applerouth is a teacher and an educational innovator, a nationally certified counselor with a PhD in educational psychology. Jed has researched student cognition, memory, motivation, and learning strategies to enhance the pedagogical strategies of Applerouth Tutoring Services. Jed is also a trained artist. He has found a way to merge his counseling and educational insights, visual talents, and whimsical sense of humor into a highly effective and original method for teaching academic subjects and preparing students for college and grad school admissions tests. Jed continually seeks new ways to improve the methods and materials of Applerouth Tutoring Services, researching the most innovative pedagogical strategies to keep his tutors on the cutting edge of the education industry. No stranger to assessments, Jed scored a perfect 2,400 on the SAT and a super scored 36 on the ACT. So let me just first start out by saying why we have Jed here today. Well, test anxiety and stress is a major problem for students and parents alike. So with Jed's insights, we're going to dig deep into how we can look into alleviating some of that stress for both students and parents. So something that I think is extremely valuable for everybody. And Jed is the best in the business. So I also want to tell everybody, I saw Jed give a presentation a few weeks ago at my daughter's high school, and it was amazing. Everybody was absolutely blown away by the insights. So welcome, Jed.
Thank you, Jim. Great to be here.
Yeah, definitely. So let's just get right into it. And can you tell us a little bit about your company, Applerouth Consulting, and how and why did you start it?
Sure thing. This started back in 2001. And my background, I had, in undergraduate back in the 90s, I was studying international business. And by the end of it, though, I realized I was kind of getting thin on the business side, all the accounting and finance and so forth. I applied to go to either the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps. I went out to AmeriCorps in northern New Mexico, which I loved. I was teaching the 5th grade, Taos Elementary. After that, I came back to Atlanta, and I had 2 years working as a consultant for McKinsey and Company, flying around, doing all this business, helping companies become more profitable and so forth. When I finished that, at the very end of that, I did a 10-day therapeutic process it's called the Star Foundation, something both my mother and father had done years and years ago, and they wanted all the kids to go. And after this, it was this life-changing moment. And I really got more in touch with, I guess, some of the inner parts of myself. And I think the inner kid is a word I use and Star uses. After that, I had one more job interview in a corporate world. But when I went to the interview, every cell in my body said, no, we can't do this. We have to do something very different after all these years of business and so forth. After that, I started doing painting and doing art. And so I was painting, I was selling my artwork. I found that after about 3 or 4 months of just being in a few galleries and showing some work, I needed a little more income. And one of my friends from McKinsey said, you know what, when I was in college, I did some tutoring. And that was a way to kind of make ends meet. And for me, I was looking for a way to pay for my art supplies and pay for my rent. And also that would go well with working with kids. I love working with children. So I started tutoring in 2001 by myself, and I was painting 3 days a week. I was tutoring 1 day a week. And then over time, the tutoring began to grow, and I was tutoring 3 days a week. And suddenly the tutoring became a full-time thing. And after about 3 years, I was so booked out. It's like, I either turn away business or I began to hire other people. And that was when I began to hire tutors from other places. And now we're a national company. We have several hundred tutors.
Wow.
And I went back soon thereafter to get a master's in counseling when I began to realize one of my kids came to me. I was helping him work on his GPA, and he began telling me that he was getting into drugs and smoking pot. And he then showed me burn marks on his arm. And he's like doing all this, some self-harm. And I'm like, what do? I know how to help a kid get an A in a class. But when a kid comes to me with this problem and his parents are going through a really hard divorce, and so that's when I said, you know what, let me go get some more skills. and I went back and signed up for a master's program in counseling. And when I finished that, I was kind of in the zone. I was in my 30s. I'm like, why don't I just stay and get the PhD? And so I found a program in educational psychology with learning and motivation, all these things, which dovetailed nicely with my work, with my outside work and with the counseling work. And then I finished that doctorate just 2 years ago. So it's been quite a ride, but working with academics, helping kids with that, and also with the mental health part. And I'm still very involved with the STAR Foundation. I think that I went to back in 2001. I then, after I got my therapeutic degree and my counseling certification, I'm back on staff there. And so I do actually help people going through other anxiety-related issues and so forth, not just the academic side.
Very, very interesting. Very complete tutor, to say the least. Amazing. So let me ask you this. What is the state of stress and anxiety currently for, high school age students? And you do primarily work with high school age students. Yeah. Is that correct?
Primarily high school, some middle school, some college. But the levels of anxiety, as you probably know, they're higher than they've ever been. We're often say that we're currently in the age of anxiety right now. And it's not just because of the geopolitical landscape or some of the insecurity, what's happening with global affairs and the economy, but also the price of education, the cost of schooling, some of the anxiety of getting things wrong, our cell phones, our technologies. Of course, the way we manage our stress, and we're losing some of that time to decompress and center ourselves. And we're pretty much filling our mental space constantly. So I think a lot of the old technologies and techniques that helped us ground ourselves and center ourselves are going away, and we're compulsively filling every instant. But I think the kids now are just feeling the stress. There have been a number of documentaries recently about this, and the race to nowhere, and all, waiting for Superman, and all these kind of things where kids are feeling, the stress about getting into schools. They realize high school is a precursor. And now we're all looking at, I can't get a C or a low grade, or all of a sudden I've botched this thing. And there's just more pressure in terms of getting in, more pressure for getting scholarships, paying for school. And I think I see this also across college campuses, where the recent research that's come out of Michigan, their study, that more kids are coming with anxiety, with depression. They're doing more binge drinking, more self-harm, more medication. So it's not just high school. This is following them through into college, when that same sense of anxiety and stress seem to be pretty prevalent.
Yeah, it's epidemic. And, I have 2 kids, and I hear about it quite often, about the stress that these kids are enduring. I've seen it firsthand with kids taking entrance exams to get into the high schools here in New York City.
Sure.
The parents are extremely stressed out. The kids are extremely stressed out.
Yeah.
It's epidemic, and it's a little bit sad, to be quite frank.
Yeah, I think so too. When I look at the burdens these kids are taking on, and when I graduated from high school, I took, I think, 8 AP exams, and that was something, and I was the outlier. That was extremely unusual for my high school back in 94. And now I work with, Bronx Science last week and Stuyvesant, and these kids are doing 13, 14, where 8 is, not even average. And the workloads have gotten pretty crazy. And when I got to college, to Penn, I was pretty much burnt out. It's one of those things where I ended up working really hard in high school, and I had a goal, and I ended up just doing all the activities and all the academics. And when I got to Penn, I was exhausted, honestly. Yeah. And that, I was almost on burnout freshman year. And now that's quite common, where students just, they've pushed so hard, and junior year is so intense, and they push through senior year. And at some point, like, when is there going to be a break? When they're nervous about wasting a summer or not filling it. And like, where is that time to decompress and recenter yourself? And I needed to actually back off. And for me, my body gave me a break at the end of sophomore year, when I was doing all the hardcore classes for Wharton, and my body just, it got mono. And then suddenly I had to leave and miss my exams. I went home, and like, my body broke down, and I was sick for a couple months. And then when I came back the next year as a junior, I pressed reset on my entire life. And I did a painting class at Penn. I did a class on modern poetry. I lived with my best friend versus living alone in high-rise South. I got on the meal plan. I was off. And so pretty much I tried to recreate a life that was more nurturing, that was less stressful. And I ended up going from one of the worst years of my life to one of the best years when I was a junior in college. And all of a sudden it was more spacious, and I was doing much more self-care. And I think I took myself out of the race for a little bit. And then it was a massive relief. And I just like, wow, I needed to get sick. I needed to have mono and miss all my finals to come back and press reset on everything.
It's so important to have methods of decompressing throughout the day for busy professionals and certainly for students. I do hear stories about high school students that are up till 2 or 3 in the morning doing homework, and they don't have really any breaks throughout the day, and it's really unhealthy.
Yeah. And that loss of sleep is a big part of it too.
Yeah.
There's so much of stress regulation and cortisol and stress hormones. When you don't sleep, you turn up all your stress hormones. And you're looking for pain reduction. And it's definitely a factor. Can you self-regulate your moods, your affect, your anxiety? And if you're not getting sleep, it's so much harder. And these kids, and I talked briefly at Bronx Science about some of the issue is kids are, when they're studying, they also have all their applications open, and they're not doing pure studying, which makes things much less efficient, which then pushes their work up into the wee hours. And if they would just work on better regulating their environments, they'd be able to finish earlier and then have that full night's sleep, which those minds and bodies need.
It drives me insane. I have a daughter who's in high school, but I speak to other parents, and they study to your point, they study quite often and are binge watching something on Netflix. It's unbelievable. I don't get it, and it drives me nuts, and I get angry. And but okay. Anyway, so let's move on a little bit. So can you tell us a little bit maybe about what's going on in the body when high levels of stress are occurring?
Absolutely. And yeah, the primary thing is we have this autonomic nervous system, which has a stress response, which has saved our lives. If we got to this point, evolutionary line, this stress response has saved us from danger for millions of years on the savannah. And we have this response, which it's often deemed fight or flight. I've also heard fight, flight, freeze, or even fight, flight, freeze, or fold. These are different responses when we're facing danger and threats. In the body, the system, it starts off with, okay, the amygdala perceives danger, and that's always scanning for threats. And there's something perceived as a threat, and it could be, but the same system which sees a person, an assailant, or a blue light, a cop behind you, or a test, and they can all be perceived as a threat. And then it releases this cascade of neurochemicals. It starts off, there's a spike in cortisol, which is a primary stress hormone, also norepinephrine, epinephrine. And the body, the changes that manifest are there to help us get ready for the encounter. And so our pupils dilate, so we have a bigger field if something's coming at us. Our breath changes, it gets a little more shallow. The skin tension changes, the blood flow changes more in the core, less blood flow going to digestion, which often can lead to the butterfly or feelings of discomfort there. Pretty much, and the mind changes also, because too much cortisol, it begins to affect our working memory. And then when we read something, what did I just read? Because right in the middle of that high danger system, what you read is not as important as escaping this immediate danger, this threat. So there are so many things happening to students that when they say, I can't remember what I just read, or I feel, discomfort in my stomach, or that's all real. And there's all this chemical cocktail that's flowing through your bloodstream when you're in this stress response.
So why students are taking a test or while they're studying, is it safe to assume the things that are creating this stress response are many times an inner dialogue of, what if I fail? Oh, I don't understand this right now.
Yeah.
So based on your research, let's get into some of the best methods for studying to start out, and maybe count and using those methods to really kind of counter that inner critic.
Sure, without question. And that's right. When you're in the middle of an assessment or a test or whatever it is, and you're having a stress response, there is typically inner dialogue, which is fueling that. And there's so much that we know, the cognitive behavioral revolution and how we conceive of things. Our thoughts, they're things. Our thoughts then change our bodies, release neurochemicals. Everything is all tied together. Your self-talk fuels the anxiety. And it's a subjective response. If you decide this thing is, a test is either an opportunity or a threat. And it's a subjective evaluation. If you say this thing is a threat to me, then you're in a higher stress state. And during the talk I gave last week, I mentioned to you there is a curve of performance, and you want to have some stress. And I don't want to say stress is all bad. There's this, it's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, where no stress leads to low performance if you don't care. And you need, like when you're taking an assessment, you need some activation, some attention, some norepinephrine, a little bit, some cortisol to make sure you're attentive and you're focused and so forth. Then you ride that curve to the place where they call eustress, which is the sweet spot. You, like euphoria, euphemism. So it's eustress is the right level where performance is maximized, the right level of attention and focus of this really counts. Let me be in my game. Then you go past that curve and the performance declines. Then you're in distress. And that's when there's too much anxiety, too much arousal, and you can't regulate it, and it hurts your performance. So the idea that what's happening, with the self-talk of this thing is a threat, at some point is, okay, I have to get focused. This is important. This matters. But then, having to manage that. And the self-talk, what's happening, therapists would call it cognitive obstruction. They would say these off-task thoughts of, oh God, what if I fail this thing? And you begin imagining this scenario when you screw this up and this whole thing events and the shame, the stigma, the problems. All of a sudden, that's now front and center in your working memory. That's taking up your cognitive capacity. So that's getting you off task. Additionally, and when you have too much cortisol, too much stress hormone, you read something and then you can't remember what did I just read. Then you have to read it again and it slows you down, you lose time and so forth. You might miss a problem and then you freak out. You're imagining, oh God, things are going downhill. So you have all these scenarios playing out in your head. And your inner critic might be telling you, now you really screwed this thing up. Oh, here it goes. Now you blew it. It's all over. It's all downhill. And so these inner voices are so powerful. And the ability to regulate your self-talk is one of the most important skills that a teenager can have, that an adult can have, that anyone can have. And it's this metacognitive ability to manage yourself, to know what's happening in your mind, and to calm yourself down. And I talk to kids about what's happening, and the amygdala is sending threat signals, cortisol, stress hormone, and you have to get to the front of the brain. You have to move from that the limbic brain to the frontal cortex. And that's where the brain can say it's going to be okay. And things are okay. This is not a major threat. And you begin to send this neurochemical called GABA, which calms the amygdala down. There's a loop between the frontal cortex and the amygdala. And I tell them it's like you're this almond of fear, the amygdala, you're calming it down, saying it's going to be okay. And then that starts changing your own internal neurochemistry and the stress response. So some of the interventions, and there are so many interventions. Part of it, we went through about 20 different things that might help. And one thing I'm doing right now, I'm holding like a stone or a little rock. And it's funny, on my desk, I have all these little rocks and things and stones, which I like. And here there's a pyramid. And
very nice.
Yeah, there are little things that I have. And I like holding it sometimes. And before, when I used to give big talks, I would have a little crystal or something that I would hold, and it would kind of ground me. And even the very shape of like the pyramid, it's a strong centered shape. And whenever I'm in the middle of chaos or crisis or things are going wrong, there are times I imagine something that helps me center. And whether it's a shape or an object or a mantra, there are so many things that you can use externally to help calm your internal state and help you self-regulate. So that's one tiny intervention, is having something, they call it a worry stone, or you hold something that's sacred, that's one of the first things. Should I just start going through different things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are really interested in methods to help kids get out of the self-critic loop during high stress situations. So yeah, if you could, so obviously one of them is holding a stone, and some other methods definitely.
Absolutely.
Love actionable tips are really wonderful.
Let's do it. So we have our takeaways. So we have, having some kind of thing which helps you get calm, get centered. That's helpful. One of the next things is the most ancient thing that we have is our breath.
Yes.
And the connection between the breath and the internal state. And they've known that in the Eastern countries for millennia. And now we have some of the science to back it up to understand what's going on. And when you're getting nervous and when you have the stress hormones cascading through you, your breath gets shorter and it gets more chest-based. And so part of it, you want to get back into some slow breathing into the diaphragm, which you practice whenever you do, mindfulness, or you do yoga or any kind of Tai Chi, Qigong. The breath is the foundation of these practices. We talk about moving your chi, moving your prana. And now from a Western perspective, what we understand now, when you're doing the deep diaphragmatic breathing, like from the gut, like that breathing, you're stimulating one of the most important nerve centers in the body. It's called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is giving signals, and it's activating, when you do the deep breathing, it activates and stimulates the vagus nerve, which then stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So you have two systems. You have sympathetic, which is kind of ratcheting things up, getting excited. Then you have the parasympathetic, I think of like paralyzed, and it brings things back down again. And so the deep breathing stimulates that nerve center, and it sends messages to calm down, less cortisol, calm yourself. So the deep breathing in and of itself, and showing kids how to do this. Often you say, show me a deep breath, and they'll do something like that. Like, no. Right. It's not here. That chest thing isn't a deep breath. Your chest, your shoulders aren't diaphragm. Think of like the Buddha. And I show them, you hold it out, you hold, breathe it in, hold. And you can't be simultaneously doing deep, slow, relaxed breathing and having all these stressful thoughts, because the breathing itself starts countering and starts changing your thinking. So we have our stones, we have the deep breathing. One of the next basic interventions is, I do this myself when I'm in a really stressful condition, touch. And there's so much evidence, like the importance of physical touch and the way our bodies respond to touch. And we know that, babies without touch, they just die. Touch is part of our system of connection, it's our grounding system. And if one of my good friends was a neuropsychologist and he's a researcher using like lab rats, whenever you startle a baby rat and you take it up and you pick it out of the cage, you put it back in, its cortisol level is through the roof. It's high stress. The mother goes over and the mother grooms and licks the pup. And then through the grooming of the mother, then the level of cortisol starts to decrease. So when we're young, we rely upon our caregivers using touch to calm us down. And that's something that's just part of being a mammal. That system is there. And there are these afferent nerves, these slow twitch nerves that slow touch calms the body in a way that nothing else does. And that's throughout our entire lives. So the body is a way to ground ourselves. And that's why there was some research using fMRI machines a couple years ago where they put someone in the machine and they would give them a small shock, and the shock would be a little pain. And then they had three conditions. And they'd measure the blood flow in the brain, and they'd measure stress levels. And they found that just the stress, instantly your stress would spike after the shock. Then they had two conditions. They had a stranger holding your hand, and then they had someone like a spouse holding your hand. And they found that just, the shock alone took a long time to calm down. The stranger's hand, it helped quite a bit. Having someone you didn't know touching, the physical pressure of the touch. Having a spouse hold your hand, and the whole brain pattern changed. And everything went into a much calmer, relaxed state. And the stress was almost immediately relieved. So like having someone you love or, give you a hug, give you a touch. And we do this throughout the day. If you notice, whenever there's a stressful thing happening, people are going to be doing like their hand on their shoulder, on their heart, their leg. They're going to hold their own hand. And that's from childhood. It's the way the body calms itself is through touch. And what I do, there's a great book I have on the shelf. It's the Heart Math Solution. And it's all about the
math solution.
Heart math. It's a whole thing. It's this enterprise looking at the connection with the heart and the body and breathing. And it gives exercises about breathing through your heart. And what I do when I'm really worked up, I'll put my hand directly on my heart and I'll breathe. And I imagine I'm breathing in through this part, kind of activating the heart center, the heart chakra, and somehow or other, the physical touch, the pressure on my chest and the breathing and the slow breathing totally calms me down. So whenever I get really bad news or something scares me, I'll put my hand on my chest and I'll take a few deep breaths, and that'll help me get a hold of myself. So that's another thing. So there's physical touch. There's other things that we know are grounding and centering. Nature. Time in nature, we know, is, I see your plant behind you. Even the sound of a waterfall, like in a dentist's office, has been shown to help teenagers calm themselves down and release stress levels. So natural sounds, being outdoors, a quick walk outside can be very grounding. That's something that we can do. It's very simple. If you're getting worked up, if we're getting hyper arousal, nature grounds us, and sounds of nature. If we can, often in Manhattan, it could be a little bit harder, but finding a little moment, a tiny garden, a natural space you've created for yourself can be grounding. Yeah.
How about, I've seen you talk about this, and it's something I work with as well. So I know I'm not throwing you under the bus with this question,
Sure.
but normalizing your feelings.
Yes.
Acknowledging your feelings and actually reframing them to kind of normalize them, which I find to be extremely powerful. So if you could maybe talk a bit about that.
I'd love to. So normalizing anxiety and fears and feelings. And the prevalence of like test anxiety is 61% of students experience it sometimes. And then about a fourth of kids experience it all the time. And so students often don't talk about this, but if they understood the base rates, they understood how prevalent this is, it does take away the stigma of, oh, I'm weird, or I'm different, or I'm dysfunctional. And even like rates of anxiety, I think one in 5 Americans is taking Xanax right now. Anxiety levels, and 1 in 3 roughly Americans will have an anxiety event that's significant during the course of their life. Anxiety is prevalent, and Americans are really good at anxiety. We do a lot of it, and cross-cultural. And females experience higher rates of anxiety than males, so being mindful of that. Like it's so normal and prevalent, and stress is just part of being a human being. We're going to have fear, we're going to have anxiety, we're going to have to do self-regulation throughout our lives. And whether we're having arousal over an assessment or a grade, or whether it's over a job, or whether it's over a child or a spouse or a sick parent, there's going to be stress in our lives. And so learning how to regulate that is important. And for students, learning that it's normal and talking to your kid about your experience of stress. And maybe academics were easy for you, but you definitely experienced stress somewhere in your life. And maybe it was, you were a great student, but you experienced stress with athletics, or before you had to give a speech for a debate, or before you the school play, or whatever it was. There's always some element of performance, or some elements where the activity you do matters and there's consequences. And then the whole thing is, how did you manage the stress? So telling your child, or here's how stress manifests for me, here are the things I've done to manage it. I think that really is really helpful. And as well as talking to the student and doing a strengths assessment. And I love having a strengths focus when you're working with someone. So, okay, you're experiencing anxiety or arousal in this area with this test. Where do you experience it? What do you do that helps you in other domains of your life? And like we're working with one student who was saying, I'm getting really worked up about this SAT. And like, well, where are other areas of your life where you experience some stress? And what have you found that's helped you? And because oftentimes we separate out these different domains of our lives and we don't realize, oh, I could bring that thing I've done over here and port it into this domain and then apply it to here. And so like one girl was really big. She was big into field hockey. And before big matches or regional things or state finals, she'd always go for a run to help calm herself down. And that's actually a different intervention too of exercise. But so the idea is, let's take what's worked for you here and let's bring it over into this area. And that's something that, here's how you manage stress, and let's bring it to this domain. One other thing we talked about, normalizing and reframing, I think is great. Sean Baylock is a researcher in the University of Chicago, and she's doing all this work on stress. I think she'd be a great interview if you could get her. I saw her at a few Learning in the Brain conferences out in San Francisco, and she wrote a book called Choke, and how do you manage stress. And one quote I love was Bruce Springsteen. There was a quote that the first few years when he was doing bigger and bigger shows as he was growing in fame in the 70s, before a show, he would experience all the symptoms of the whole response: fast heartbeat, shallow breathing, butterflies, before you go out on stage, as the audiences grew in size. And for a few years, he's like, oh, I'm scared. But there, at a certain point, he had this reframe. There's a cognitive reframe, which is, I love it, beautiful, where he's like, oh, my heart's beating, my breath's changing. It's not that I'm afraid, it's that I'm excited. And suddenly he had this moment of, oh, and I've seen this, it's called, it's a cognitive reframe. It's called the reappraisal of arousal. You're reassessing what's actually happening, trying to interpret your body's signals of, oh, it's not bad. This just means I'm ready and I'm excited. And I've seen this research done around 2012 or so with GMAT students, about 140 GMAT kids. And there was a control group who just took it. Then they had this other group who read this script, that students who are experiencing sweaty palms, heightened, heartbeat, these kind of things, they're actually, those physical symptoms correlate with higher GMAT scores. And they had this interesting reframe and they read the script that, oh, if you're experiencing this, it means you're about to go and do really, really well. And students, and then the control group had their scores. This intervention group who read the script, who reframed the arousal, their GMAT scores bumped up like dramatically. And so it's just the reappraising that these physical symptoms, we're looking for evidence, am I ready or not ready? And often you look to your body to say, how do I feel about something? And the body's giving you clues. And if you reframe the physical cues, that helps you optimize your performance. And so telling kids, the heartbeat, it means you're actually getting ready for peak performance. Like if you ask an athlete, oftentimes like they're getting into game time and they said, my body does change before the big game. It means I'm ready, not I'm ill prepared. So that's a great reframe for kids to help them normalize what's happening and say it's just your body and some cortisol you need to perform optimally and focus optimally.
That's great. I love it. Could I share one? Let me share one method of kind of reframing as well, which I've talked about frequently as well. So when you are in the moment, when you're studying or at the point of taking the test and you realize that, hey, I'm becoming really nervous, one way to normalize those feelings is just say, you know what? Label it. Just say, I'm feeling nervous. But then you take it a step further to normalize it. And you say, you know what? I'm about to take a test. It's completely normal for me to feel nervous. It's okay to feel this way. Most other people that are in this situation probably have similar feelings. And then you're bringing those feelings out into the open, and it just makes everything feel a lot more calm at the moment. So that's something I've taught. It works, and it's a method of normalizing your feelings. Now, one thing I would say about all of these is that it's important to practice these while you're studying, right? So that when you get to the actual event, you've actually practiced going through reframing some of these thoughts and recognizing them and being able to kind of take control of these feelings and emotions before they take control of you. So
without question. And there's even a piece I want to add to that of what you're doing in the moment when you're writing about it's okay to feel nervous and you're thinking it through. Sean Baylock and one of her colleagues, Ramirez, I think that was his name, at Chicago, did an intervention about expressive writing. And so for 10 short minutes, you sit down and you write about your arousal, about your anxiety, about your fears. And because what happens, many people get into a cognitive loop and they're thinking and when you stop and write and draw attention and say, I'm experiencing some fear and I'm having some thoughts. And, typically in the past when I would have tests, I would get nervous, so my thoughts would race, or my heartbeat would, and by the act of writing about it is an intervention. And they showed that there was a net change in test and performance. By taking 10 minutes, it could be a week before, and not writing for an hour, but 10 minutes, and you write about how it affects you. And that's actually quite therapeutic and helpful. So I think that's great.
That sounds great. And, if I can actually add to that a little bit, another person that I've interviewed for this series is a Harvard neuroscientist. His name is Srini Pillay. And he was telling me some stats, and basically 90 to 95% of our thoughts occur on the subconscious. And we have 50 to 80,000 thoughts a day. I mean, and I've seen that research all over the place, but we'll just use it for these purposes. And the scary thing is that 80% of our thoughts are negative and recurring. So as a student who's about to take a test or while you're studying, you kind of can get into this loop of, what if I fail?
Yes.
My parents are going to kill me. I'm not going to get into college. I'm not going to, be able to do whatever I want to do. What if I fail? And you just keep saying those things repetitively. And these thoughts are really occurring on one level very much on the subconscious. So by bringing them out of the subconscious, then you can deal with them.
Exactly right.
Work with them. And by writing for 10 minutes about your feelings, that's what you're doing, is you're bringing them out from the subconscious. And
that's right.
You're creating this higher level of awareness of your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions. And if you think about it, before you do that, your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions kind of take control of you. But after you bring them out into the open, you can actually take control of your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions. And
That's right.
There's no more powerful skill than that. If you really think about that on its purest level, being able to take control of your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions, extremely powerful.
Yeah. Can I add to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's something with a researcher at Harvard, the idea of the negativity bias that our brain does. It feels slights and negative things much more strongly than the positives. And that's just part of how we're structured for survival. And it's maybe made it help us survive through all these years. One thing I found that's really quite helpful, and I've done this myself, and part of the work we do at STAR, this therapeutic place I work, is we actually embody, personify, and name the negative aspect of the personality. And with the work therapeutically, with kids, we'll talk about the test anxiety, the anxiety monster. And I could even have a student draw it or write about it. And sometimes when those little voices come, it's helpful to start to figure out who's talking in my brain. We have these sub-personalities, these clusters of, and what I talk about at STAR, we have a critic. There's a critic, then there's even like a shadow. The shadow side starts getting really dark, but the critic, and there's a dance people can do. When the critic starts hammering of you always screw this up, and then there's something we call like the wounded child. It starts getting sad and upset. But there's also an internal part of the brain. We call it like the wise adult, like the wise parent. And we all have these internal constructs. And then there's something called like the radiant child, which is like the happy, joyous part. And some people are operating on this interesting dynamic of like the critic and the wounded kid are just always chattering. And the whole thing is, how do I bring in this construct of this wisdom figure, which is internal? And you might use externally like the image of some religious thing or some other wise person, but we have this inner wise part of ourselves, like this about the higher self. And can I activate that? And you might, as for tutoring, I might call it your inner coach. Who's the one saying, you've got this, you can do this. But the idea, and there was some research out of Michigan, Ethan Cross did some research of the importance of these you statements, of not saying, I can do this, but in your own self-talk, say, Jim, you've got this, man. Jim, you can do this. And you're embodied, there's like some higher other part of the personality that it's kind of going to the balcony of this metacognitive lift, this move, and this wise-centered part is giving you nurturing, supportive thoughts, countering the critic. And sometimes you might say to the critic, it's time for you to leave right now. You're not helping. And so when those thoughts come, it's like, thanks, Morris, or whatever you call the critic. You might, right. Morris, I appreciate that, but not right now. And so you're starting to get, there's a book, Psychosynthesis, about how do you work with all these different voices and parts. And sometimes embodying them, naming them, even drawing them or having an image of, oh, that's Morris, the critic. And it helps you take away some of the power versus, oh, I'm damaged, or, oh, that's just Morris. He's always, that's his job. And at some level, at a very higher level, you realize part of his job is like an ego defense, a protective thing, trying to, in some crazy way, keep you safe and small, and that's his job. But ultimately, it's like this wise adult figure. How do I get more into alignment with that wise-centered figure and give that more attention? And by naming these different voices at the table, you get some measure of control. And you start to work your thoughts and get more centered in your life when you start understanding and parsing the chatter, not just it's all me, but oh, these are subparts of my personality. That can be pretty helpful. Yeah,
that's amazing. And again, I want to stress how you can practice everything we've just gone through. All of these tools, people can practice why they're studying, so they can utilize them during the test.
That's right.
And another thing I've heard you talk about as well is visualization. So
yes,
you can visualize yourself going through these processes during the test as well. So again, another way to just kind of help you call up these tools when you need them, because the problem is when that amygdala starts firing, we kind of lose our rational sense of thought, and it becomes difficult to calm ourselves down. And these
That's
tools help calm ourselves down. And you can't, the problem is we don't remember to go to these tools so often. So visualization.
And we call it cognitive rehearsal, visualization.
Cognitive rehearsal.
And it's all the same stuff. But one of the most important things to do is when you're envisioning, get as detailed and as sensory as you can. Like imagine the feel of the pencil, imagine turning the page, imagine bubbling, and imagine like I've made like audio recordings for my students before, where I had them close their eyes get relaxed. And I imagine them walking through this test. And like you come to number 17, you start, you're not sure of the answer, you move forward. And then like you come to the end of the section, you're feeling good, you're feeling centered, like you take a break. And I walk them through the entire test. Maybe I do it for like 10 minutes. And I have them go and play this. And I have them lay down a track. And in this track, they're missing some problems, but they're like, you're feeling okay. You're calming yourself down, taking deep breaths. You put your hand on your chest. You say it's going to be okay. And I have them play this a few times. And so I'm creating a new possibility for them. If before this, they've only experienced stress, anxiety, real like paralysis, and like, let's put down a new track that the brain, and the more we reinforce this, the more likely you're going to be able to access this when you're in that stress condition. And that's, to your point, all these interventions, we got to practice them. Because the more times we lay down this new track, the neuron, like those connections get stronger with every round of reinforcement. So that deep breathing, let's do it 20 times when you aren't stressed. So when you're in that stress condition, you have that resource. The hand on the chest, or saying, Morris the critic, go away. Let's practice that during the week. So when you're in the stress condition, you've reinforced it enough so it's salient, it's there, it's active for you.
Yeah, amazing stuff. I really love this conversation. Really actionable ways of intervening. I think the conversation would be remiss, though, if we didn't touch on some of the best practices for studying. What are the most effective ways for kids to study and prepare for the test? And I know, yeah,
absolutely. When it comes to high stakes testing, one of the most important things in terms of performance, Albert Bandura's work out of Stanford, you have to have mastery experiences. There's this notion of self-efficacy. Your beliefs of how you'll do in a certain task is actually as important, if not more important, than actual ability, your beliefs. And your beliefs about how you're going to do are informed by prior mastery experiences. So we have to give students the sense of mastery. And for some students who are starting off really struggling, we have to create some success for them. Give them some experience of themselves as competent and capable to begin to reframe their view of themselves. That'll actually affect how they perform on future rounds of this. When they come to a hard problem, if they have a high level of self-belief, they're going to try harder. They're going to bring forth more resources. So for students, we have to do practice tests. And it may be that a student, when they start off, their timing is really slow, let's say on the ACT, then I might stretch it out, give them more time in the beginning and slowly build up, give them some success, and then slowly get them ready to the actual constraints of the test. Time on task matters a lot. And, the time you put in, it translates to the outcome. We know this. The way in which you study matters. And there's a lot of research I presented at Bronx Science about the importance of spacing study versus massing. And you need time to forget and then reinforce connections and remember and recall and retrieve. You need time, like spending a week cramming isn't remotely as good as spending 10 weeks with breaks in between, time away from the content. The importance of reviewing your notes within 24 or 48 hours really helps you retrieve and recall that better in the long term, is very powerful. So don't just learn it on, the class Sunday, then don't see it again until next week. If you review it and reinforce it, it's going to really help things. The importance of forced retrieval practice, of not just rereading things, but quizzing yourself, testing yourself. Do I know this? Like covering the page. Every time you force retrieval and bring something back from long-term memory, it helps make that connection stronger and stronger, versus just passive reading. And I talked about like highlighting really wasn't that helpful. And anything passive, you need errorful learning. You have to be revealing the places that you don't understand and don't know. And so you need to review things that show your deficits, and then you work on those very explicitly and very directly. That's very powerful. Working with good materials. And I think after every time you miss a problem, you step back and you start to understand and analyze it. Because just taking practice tests by themselves won't help you. It's stopping, saying what happened here, and really analyzing what did I frame this thing the wrong way, and learning from your mistakes. Your mistakes are the biggest ways to learn. And reframing it so mistakes aren't bad. They simply are the most important things for progress, for learning, for growth. And celebrate that. Say, okay, now I can actually learn how to avoid this issue. Or revealed, I have to work on my advanced understanding of ellipses or conic sections or whatever was going wrong. Then that'll help you in the future. So not being hypercritical when you reveal a deficit or a mistake that you've made. And then timing tasks, because especially for the ACT, time is fundamental. And working up, with that clock, and the clock is your ally and your friend, not being nervous about it, and building up that skill and that strength, because these are all muscles you can cultivate and develop.
Great. How about for the person that's studying for the biology test in 2 days, and they have a lot of work to do? Is it okay to take breaks after 45 minutes?
Absolutely.
And is it okay to play a video game for 10 minutes after 45 minutes?
Yes.
Or should you just plow through for 4 hours straight?
The brain will deplete its supply of glucose, and the brain is going to become progressively less efficient until you're at a zero return where you can't hold anymore. And there's a thing of like the primacy and recency. Like the first thing you learn, you'll remember, and the last thing you learn, you'll remember. You'll forget the middle. And the longer you're studying, we aren't designed to be able to spend 6 hours studying and retain things. Very, very, very few of us are. We need breaks, and the breaks replenish and make our learning much more efficient and more effective. So taking after an hour, after 40 minutes, and everyone's different in terms of how long they can go before they're exhausted and they can't retain anymore. They're just pouring, it's already full. You need time to go take a walk, and getting away from that cognitive task is really helpful. Doing something else is great. Talking, chatting, but then coming back. So structuring in breaks is essential. And also interleaving different subjects is really helpful. So it's better, we know from research, to do an hour of biology, then interleave some of the mathematics, then go to the bio, versus let me do 4 hours of bio and then put the math at the end. That's not how the brain works. We're going to be overwhelmed, and we eventually hit a point of very diminishing returns for the biology without breaks and without a switch, a cognitive shift. So that's important. And also the environment is essential. Is it a noisy? Some people, music is essential. I play the same soundtrack for the past 20 years of Enya, which I began playing in the 90s. And now when I hear it, my brain instantly goes into study mode. I turn my phone off. I get rid of my distractions. Because every time that phone things or pings, you go to shallow processing, and it takes you about 10 minutes or so to get back where you were before. With every distraction, every interruption, it throws you. And if you want to do deep encoding, deep processing to long-term memory, you need to minimize distractions and manage your environment very skillfully. And so having other things up, having Netflix up, you're going to stay at a very shallow level of processing. You're not going to retain as much or encode as much or as deeply. There's evidence that changing your study environment for many people can be helpful. Because if I practice this bio in this room, then I practice the bio in the library, like every new place seems to lay down a new level of encoding of the memory, which is interesting, but also minimally distracted. The time of day matters. Some students can really retain and focus and think in the evening. Some students, they're morning people. And it's really important that you work with your own biorhythm, your natural levels of energy and fluctuations. Everyone's different. Some people are owls. Some people at night, they're worthless. Some people at night, they're brilliant. And so the name of the game is know thyself. It's all that metacognitive, that's the piece of where am I good and when am I good? And also, the ability to save time if you need support or help, to recruit resources. That's a really important thing of knowing when I need some more support and help. Oftentimes females are better at that. Then some of the guys need a little prodding to go and ask for help and save time for that. So don't study the night before and then it's too late to get help. Like do a couple nights earlier, and if there's a problem, or go talk to the teacher. And these are all important skills to have. And spreading it out over a series of days versus the cram, which some kids it works, but most people it doesn't. And so what works for Billy might not work for Tim.
Right.
And so the name of the game, it's the Delphic Oracle of know thyself. Know thy brain, know how you study, and you're going to have a serious leg up going forward because you know what you need. And some kids, they have to bounce the ball against the wall, and that helps them focus. And great. Just don't disturb everyone else around you, but whatever you need to study, whether it's music, whether it's a silent room, like a clock sweeping will make me crazy because I have a hard time inhibiting. My brain just takes everything in, and that's part of my charm, but also, it's your strength and a weakness. So you have to regulate things, and it may you need noise canceling headphones, but everyone's different. And so just doing an inventory, diagnosing what works for me, and then making that possible.
There's so much there, so much in this conversation. Amazing tips. Thanks. Sure. I think we're getting a little long on time, so I want to look to wrap it up, but I just have, a couple of more, I think, important questions. As a parent, when should you become concerned about your child and your child having test anxiety?
You become concerned either if performance is really slipping, or if they come back and they express to you that that was really hard for me. I think you're trying to figure out if things are, they come back and they seem fine, the grades are fine. Okay, I'm not going to really dig deep and pry. If they come back and say, I was so stressed out, or you notice them getting really anxious, or you notice them like they can't sleep, or their behaviors are changing around the test, or they start saying things to you about fear or about possible negative outcomes, they're giving you a clue that this is starting to weigh on them. And they're starting to get into this cyclic, this rumination and this thinking, which may not be helpful for them. And that's when, or they seem like they're fine, but then the grades come back and they're like, wow, what happened? Or if the practice tests were all up here, then they go in for the actual thing and the performance comes in here. That's when I, let's talk about this. And not in any kind of negative or shame and critical way, but from a place of curiosity and a place of compassion. And how was that for you? In a very neutral, open, non-loaded question. What was it like for you taking the test? And what was your experience taking the test? So you aren't loading it in any kind of way, but you're letting them express what their experience was in that moment. And it was okay, or I got nervous, or during the break, they were all turning the pages. I was behind. I felt stressed out. Or and also helping them make sure the kids are getting enough sleep, they eat a good breakfast. All these things are helpful, and parents can help with some of the structuring. But I think the conversation should emerge if there's some evidence that something is amiss. And as a parent, you begin cluing in, something seems different or they seem off. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, Jed, thank you so much. Do you have any new projects coming up, or tell the viewers how they can reach you?
Oh, sure. They can always reach me. It's info@Applerouth, Applerouth, just my last name. And we'll get back to you about those things. The next big project for me, I'm doing more painting these days. I'm doing a lot more art. I want to get
great.
I'm taking some actual proper time. I was in Colorado painting for 2 weeks.
Oh, awesome.
And working on my landscapes. The next big thing for me is the next big thing is writing a book. Something that everyone does, and I think that I finished my PhD, and I promised myself within 5 years I'm going to create a manuscript of some sort. Whether it's about study skills or some part of this, and it might be about the anxiety piece. It might be something of self-regulation academically for kids, a guide for parents. But that's something that I would feel accomplished if I did that. I would feel good about that.
Well, I think you have a tremendous amount to offer, and if that's worth anything, I really would implore you to write that book, because
thank you.
There's so much knowledge there. So yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to the viewers and listeners for tuning into this edition of the Don't Panic Project. Through these conversations, we are aiming to help provide tools and awareness to those suffering from stress, anxiety, and depression. You can see more great conversations at www.thedon'tpanicproject.com, and you can contact me at jimposner@themindfuladvantage.com. I want to just finish by saying, if you're an educator and you're watching this, I would highly recommend that you reach out to Jed and inquire about having him speak at your school. His presentations are amazing and full of really, really valuable information. So please reach out to Jed, and I look forward to seeing everybody on the next episode of the Don't Panic Project. So thanks a lot.